Hey everyone, welcome back to Mom Minute. Today I have a guest with me, Dr. Shivani Chopra, who is going to help me answer the parenting question from Sarah. She asks, I think my child has ADHD. How can I be sure and how can I help him or her if he does? So many of you guys may not know that my son was recently diagnosed with ADHD in December. So this is something that's really passionate to me as my family as we learn and adapt to my son's new condition. So thank you so much for being here today and helping me to, get this information out to people.
Sure.
Tell me from your perspective, and just so you guys know, she's like an amazing doctor, child psychiatrist. I forgot to throw that in there. But tell me, if you think your child has ADHD, what are some of the signs and symptoms you might see?
So there's three different types of subtypes of ADHD. So there's the predominantly inattentive type.
Right.
So you can have a hard time concentrating, get easily distracted, have a hard time listening, especially in class, not be very organized. There's a predominantly hyperactive and impulsive type. So some of the symptoms of that are being really fidgety, getting up out of your seat when you're in class, talking a lot. It's almost like you're kind of driven by a motor.
Yeah.
So a lot of kids kind of describe that. They just feel like they're on the go. And then there's the combined type, which is basically a combination of both of the inattentive and hyperactive impulsive.
Right, that's my son. He has all three, so he's really crazy. But yeah, we noticed right off, it's I think it's important to note that lots of kids can be hyperactive and that's normal. But then, if your kid has ADHD, it's above and beyond.
Right, absolutely. And actually combined type is actually the most common type that's diagnosed. So I'm not surprised to hear that. Yeah, and a lot of the parents that come in to see me, it's the same kind of story. It's like, this kid was just different from the other ones and we just knew that something wasn't quite right.
So what do they do next? They think that maybe something's not quite right. What do they do?
The best thing to do is to get a thorough psychiatric evaluation. So to see a mental health professional. I'm a little bit biased because I'm a child psychiatrist, so I think child psychiatry, we're definitely trained to do that.
Right.
But just like you're saying, just because a kid's hyper or they have attention issues, it doesn't mean they have ADHD. So the most important thing is that you have a thorough psychiatric evaluation to rule out any other causes for the inattentive issues, because that could be like anxiety or depression or other things. Part of the evaluation is giving out questionnaires. So questionnaires to the kids, to the parents, to the teachers, so you really get an understanding of what the kid's perspective is and also how the kid's doing in school and also what the parents are observing at home. You kind of take the whole evaluation and then the questionnaires and put it together and see if the picture meets or sort of fits for ADHD.
And I think it's important, at least from our experience, we were told, we kind of knew something was wrong with him from 18 months. He just acted different, but they would never diagnose him until he was 5 because they wanted to see it in two different settings, right? They want to see it at home and at school, not just in one place.
Yeah.
So that's really important. And then as soon as he went to school and we could see that he was struggling and failing and he got suspended and he's 5. So then we went and met with the child behavior specialist. And
it's usually the teachers that then say, look, there's something, your kid's having a hard time in school, they're fighting a lot, or they're really disruptive, or they can't focus, and
or all of the above.
Right, or all of the above, and so you really should go get that evaluated. And so that's how parents end up in our office.
Just from my experience too, from a parent's perspective, I called my pediatrician because I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do next. And so the pediatrician was the one that said, we don't diagnose, we'll manage meds, but we don't diagnose, so you need to go see a child psychiatrist to get the diagnosis first, which I appreciated. And then they had some recommendations for us. So it made it really easy once I started asking questions to find where I needed to go. So let's say you've taken your child in and received a diagnosis. Now what are your options?
In terms of treatment, you can look at treatment in 2 broad categories. So there's the medications, which kind of target the biological component of ADHD, and then there's environmental stuff, and that's a lot of behavioral therapy. So in terms of medications, there's stimulants and non-stimulant medications, and again, depending on the family history and the evaluation, the child psychiatrist and the family sort of decides what to use. Stimulants are often used, but not in every case. And then in terms of the behavioral therapy, there's lots of things you can do with the environment to help your child succeed, basically, right? So some of the things you can do are really help your kid stay organized. So you can use planners and organizers and structure things at school so that they, can remember to do their homework and turn it in on time and things like that. Probably the most important thing in the environment and sort of with the behavioral component of treatment is really to keep things simple and consistent and direct. So it's pretty common for people to say, hey, will you do this, this, and this? And for a kid with ADHD, that's already
like
kind
one
of
command.
Right.
Like, go put your shoes on.
Right.
And then when that's completed, give the next one.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So you want to keep things simple, direct, consistent. You know, and then another thing that you can do that sort of ties into that is really give positive reinforcement.
Yeah,
so
I think that's really important.
Because everything is a success. You know, anytime something is done or homework is done, or it's all a success in every child's life, but especially the kid who has issues with concentration or distraction or organization.
And I think that you'll find if you have a child with ADHD, a lot of their life is negative. Like negative feedback, because it's like, don't jump on the couch, don't stand up when you're not supposed to, don't talk to your neighbor when you're in class.
Absolutely.
And so they get a lot of negative, and so we've been trying really hard as parents now to be like way more positive, like, good job, buddy, you know.
Right, and exactly, and sometimes initially it can feel uncomfortable because it's like, you know, why am I praising him for this? But actually it does, the kids do really well with it. And then another thing you can incorporate into that is like a reward system. So, you know, if you get X amount of homework done, or you're good in this sort of a way, you can have 10 points, and then 100 points equals something that they want.
We do smiley faces. Like if he gets a whole month of smiley faces, then he gets his newest like little Lego toy he wants. So
perfect.
And it works. Like he comes home excited about it every day. Like, I got another smiley face today. And you're like, yay, good job.
Right, absolutely. And you know, it's important to have sort of short-term goals and then longer-term goals. Because if it's too long, then you know, it's easy for kids to give up and say, oh, well, I'm never going to get there anyway. But if they're short-term goals and then something that's longer-term, they're more likely to succeed.
Right. I think one thing I didn't realize until we went through it was that this is actually a biological condition. Like there really is something missing in their brain that is really, like, I don't know, like even my dad, when we were first explaining it to him, he was like, so if he's on his meds for a couple years, then he'll learn the behaviors and then you can take him off the meds. And we were like, no, like that's not how it works. There's actually a biological condition that we're treating with those meds, and if we take him off the meds, we stop treating him, you know?
Absolutely.
Like he's going to revert. And I think that's maybe kind of a misnomer that people don't always realize with ADHD.
Absolutely. Well, I think there is this, you know, kind of this talk of ADHD is getting diagnosed more, and people don't have the tolerance for hyper kids anymore. And, you know, and like you're saying, there is a fine line between what's hyper and then what's disruptive, and you know, sets the kid up for failure. And
I promise you, if you have a child with true ADHD, you would know the difference. We didn't tell his teacher we were putting him on his medication. We just did it, and like then we had a meeting with her like 2 days later, and she was like, he's been so good the last 2 days. It's like amazing. I don't know what you're doing at home, but keep doing it. He's been so listening so well. And we were like, yeah, he went on meds.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that because you're not the first parent that has this sort of experience. A lot of parents don't want to put their kids on meds. They try everything at home before they come into our office, and they won't tell teachers because they want to see, does this really make a difference? Does this really help? And usually the answer is yes. My perspective on medications is that you're not just treating the kid, you're treating the whole family, right? Because it's disruptive to the whole family, and it's really a pretty simple medication to take, you know, and so but it makes a big difference in their ability to succeed in school.
So when my son got diagnosed, the doctor, I thought it was really cute because he said, I'm going to treat the child and then I'm going to treat the parents. And he actually made us go to like a specialist for a couple sessions as parents to learn how to interact with our son and learn how to speak to him correctly, or like you said, give simple commands, things that would make us interact with him better and understand that process for him as well.
And what you didn't realize was you basically were doing the behavioral therapy part. And we do that all the time. We have parents attend parent training classes, and it has nothing to do with their parents not being good parents. It has everything to do with how do you interact with your child so that things are better and you're, again, promoting success. Because that's the ultimate goal, right? Is you want your kid to succeed and grow and emotionally and physically and socially in healthy and appropriate ways.
So I have to admit, I was kind of the parent at first that was like, I don't know how I feel about these meds, and he's going to get addicted to them, and they're going to ruin his life, and all this stuff. And then as I started doing the research, and the numbers are just not in your favor if they're not on medication. I mean, they're really, really some scary statistics on long-term drug abuse, not on medication, or failure in relationships, failure at school failure, at jobs, that kind of thing.
Yep.
And so we decided to go ahead and try the meds. But what are the side effects to meds?
So the common side effects that you want to worry about with mostly the stimulant medications is you can have decreased sleep because it is a stimulant. So, I always tell parents, make sure you give the medication in the morning. You don't want to give a stimulant at night because it's a stimulant. They won't sleep well. Decreased appetite because, again, it's kind of like because it's an upper, exactly. It can decrease your appetite. So what we do as child psychiatrists is we monitor their height and weight and just kind of make sure they're growing well on the curve. You can sometimes have headaches and some stomach aches, but again, that sort of is variable, and oftentimes as a kid continues on the medication, those issues can't resolve. With the longer acting stimulants that we use a lot now in treatment, you have less of this issue, but with some of the shorter acting, you can have like mood changes. So as they're coming off of
going on and coming off, going on, coming off.
So that's why, like as a child psychiatrist, for example, I usually use longer acting medications, and I think most of my colleagues do too, because it just sort of minimizes that mood lability, so that you're not, when you're coming off feeling more depressed or more irritable or crying, and you can see that sometimes with the shorter acting stimulants.
Right. Okay, those are all good to know. I didn't experience the tummy aches or headaches, but we have dealt with the sleep issues and also the lack of appetite. So we've been dealing with like a little bit of making sure he's eating really healthy, really calorie rich, snacks, that kind of stuff to keep his weight up. So,
and sometimes, just having smaller portions throughout the day makes it a little bit easier because you're not eating a big meal all at once. And since a lot of these kids tend to be pretty active, it's nice to sort of space it after like sports or after an activity where they're exerting themselves, because then it's kind of replenishing that energy.
So one of the big fallacies I think with ADHD is that the meds change them, like make them who they aren't.
Right.
So what do you have to say to that?
I haven't seen that in my practice. I actually just last night saw a patient, and parents hadn't noticed that the kid was different at all at home. But the teachers have noticed that the kid was very different. That sort of speaks volumes that I think, if anything, that it does change. You'll see change in behavior. It doesn't change who they are. But that's what we're trying to treat, is the behavior.
And I felt like with my son, he was so rowdy and disruptive all the time, and then every once in a while we'd see like this little tiny sliver of just this sweet little boy that we just fell in love with, and then it would be gone because he'd be rowdy and disruptive again. And with him on meds, it's like we're seeing that sweet boy a lot more, and the rowdy and disruptive. So I don't know, I always tell people, I'm like, well, it changes them because they're no longer rowdy and disruptive, and that's what you think of when you think of your child. That's what you think is their normal, right? But then you put them on the meds, and all of a sudden, you kind of see what they really should be if they weren't having this biological issue.
But it's not like it's changing their personality. But absolutely, it's changing their behavior. And so then they're able to act better at home and socialize better, and be more focused in class, and and that sort of has its own benefits to being able to do that. So.
I think the biggest difference is just the feedback. I don't know if I can stress that enough, because I just think the feedback is so different when they're on the medication. They're getting a lot more praise from people and positive reactions instead of negative all the time. And it's so detrimental for kids to have negative feedback all the time.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's a hard decision. I went through it myself, so I totally get it, but I'm really glad that we did the meds.
Yeah, and I think, most child psychiatrists, I know I certainly, when parents first come in and they're not sure about medications, there's no rush to start a kid on medication. I think it's important for parents and families to really know what they're getting themselves into and get all their questions asked.
And I think that, if you're at a good school, they're very involved in it too. It becomes a dialogue between, I feel like my son, it's so sweet, but I feel like he has like 20 cheerleaders with him all the time. And we have his aide at school, and, like his whole team at school that helps him. And then at home he has all of us, and then he has his doctors, and becomes this whole dialogue between all of us and trying to figure out how he's doing and what's working and what's not working. And yeah, it's great.
Yeah, that's the way it should be.
Is this something they can outgrow?
I get asked that a lot, actually. And our research shows us that actually roughly 30 to 65% of kids that have ADHD in childhood end up having symptoms into adulthood. That's a pretty significant amount of kids.
Right.
And, you know, again, in order to be a child psychiatrist, you have to do adult psychiatry as well. And so I see a lot of adults, and I have kids or adults that come in and they say, well, I've had this issue since I was a kid and I never really addressed it and I never really took care of it.
Yeah.
And so you sort of see that spectrum as well. So unfortunately, it's definitely is not the common thing for kids
Right.
to grow out of it.
And that's what we were told as well, was about roughly 50%,
Yeah.
you know, will or won't. And that we hope he outgrows it, but we're just going to go along and anticipate that he won't.
Right.
And continue, you know,
Right.
his life as though he probably won't.
Right.
And at first, I have to be honest, I was kind of sad. Like, I think it's very normal for parents to come and you go, like, there's something wrong with my child, you know, like, they're not going to be normal. They're going to be a drug addict that drives around and gets in car wrecks and has 5 divorces. And, you know, you think like these horrible worst case scenarios.
Sure.
And then what was so good for us was we had some friends come up to us, and when we started talking more about the fact that he had ADHD, people would be like, I have it. I'm a medicated ADHD.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, you're successful, you're married. You know, it was
Right.
like, yay, like there is success with this diagnosis.
Right. That's the thing to remember, is that when you're treating it to promote success,
Right.
right? So we know that if it's untreated, kids can be more likely to have issues in school, issues with relationships, you know, even issues with substance abuse or the law. And so you're doing everything you can to prevent something like that from happening. Now, every kid's different, every
Right.
situation's
Right,
different.
of
There's no
course.
way of really knowing, but, you know, if it's an issue where it's really affecting your child's life and in a very disruptive way, then it's something to at least address and sort of get evaluated.
The other fun thing is when I started researching it, there are some really brilliant people that are ADHD. I mean, and I've heard this before, like if you can kind of control it and the medicine and stuff helps, their brains, they work different, and they're really imaginative and creative and like great entrepreneurial people. And I mean, Steve Jobs, I think, is ADHD or was ADHD, and Albert Einstein, they say, was. I mean, there's some really amazing people that have brilliant brains that are ADHD.
Right. And again, you know, one of the issues with kids that have ADHD is that there's difficulty organizing tasks, right? So if you're treating that, then things are more organized. They're able to think clearer and kind of tackle problems in a different way. And so, you know, all that stuff, I think, can definitely promote success and do great things like Steve Jobs and Albert Einstein.
Yeah. Well, thank you again so much for being here and answering all these questions, and I'm sure that you guys have found this so informative. I know some of you guys may still have more questions, so I'm actually going to put a link to her website in the description box below. And also, if you have other questions for me, be sure to leave those there as well. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you next week. Bye, guys.